Aloha kako. Mahalo nui for joining us today. I know we still have some attendees joining us, but I want to go ahead and get started so we can keep to time. My name is Brianna Govea. I'm the program specialist at the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center. On behalf of the center and our two programming partners, the Lehua Scholars Program and Historic Hawaiʻi Foundation, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special event. While the remarks shared tonight don't necessarily represent opinions of the judiciary, I'd like to thank Chief Justice Mark Rechtenwald, the Hawaii State Judiciary, and the legislature for their continued support of our mission. As I mentioned, the Judiciary History Center was supported by two great organizations to help make this event possible. The Lehua Scholars Program was established in 1974 at the William S. Richardson School of Law to make legal education accessible to members of Hawaii's diverse communities. Lehua scholars are committed to social justice and service to underserved and disadvantaged communities. The Historic Hawaiʻi Foundation is a statewide nonprofit that helps people save historic places, sites that tell the stories of Hawaii's multi-layered history. And HHF does this through education, advocacy, and the assistance and protection of historic places. Today, we celebrate one of these historic places, beloved island Kahoʻolawe. This Friday will mark 27 years since conveyance of the island transferred from the United States Navy to the state of Hawaii through the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission. Our presenters tonight are three individuals intimately connected to Kahoʻolawe, having spent many years and some decades directly involved in the legal, political, and cultural events we'll learn about in a few minutes. Some quick housekeeping before I introduce our distinguished guests. When the presentations are done, we'll close the program with a Q&A with our Zoom audience. I encourage you to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your webinar screens to submit questions or comments at any point during the program. And a friendly reminder that this webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted on the Judiciary History Center's website and Facebook, as well as Historic Hawaiʻi Foundation's YouTube channels and websites. As I speak, we're also live streaming to HHF's YouTube and Facebook pages. Those links are in the chat, and the recording will be published immediately after our program ends tonight. Now, finally, the moment we've all been eagerly awaiting. Kicking off the presentations tonight is Dr. Davianna McGregor, educator and author and member of the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana. She's also director of the Center for Oral History at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Davianna has been a member of the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana since its founding in 1976, overseeing cleanup and restoration projects and coordinating cultural fieldwork on the island. In addition to her work at Kahoʻolawe, she's director of the Molokaʻi Land Trust, which seeks to protect and restore the island's natural and cultural resources and to perpetuate Molokaʻi's unique Native Hawaiian traditions. Our second presenter is Stanton Enomoto, who has spent nearly the entirety of his 30-year career in public service, focusing on environmental, natural, and cultural resource management planning and Native Hawaiian issues. He currently serves as the Senior Program Director for the U.S. Department of the Interior's Office of Native Hawaiian Relations. Stanton worked for the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission from 1995 to 2004 during the Navy's Unexploded Ordnance Clearance Project and overseeing the transfer of access control to the state of Hawaii. And our third speaker is Michael Nahoʻopiʻi, the Executive Director of the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission. Michael has been a long-time Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana member and has also served as the former U.S. Navy officer in charge of Kahoʻolawe during the island's conveyance to the state. During the first years of cleanup on Kahoʻolawe, Michael was the senior manager of the early model cleanup and the later Navy Unexploded Ordnance Clearance Project. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed speakers. You all can turn your cameras on briefly to say hello to everyone. And Davianna, begin and share your screen whenever you're ready.
kulu ka iwi o ka aina, ailana ko he malama lama, ho'ohiki ke a moku ia kana loa, akua ka moana ili, moana ili, ho'ohiki ke aloha no ke ia aina e. Aloha ka mano na kupuna. Aloha, that is the first verse in a chant that was given to us from Uncle Harry Mitchell, who learned it from his kupuna, the Oli Kuhohonu o Kahoʻolawe, and it speaks about the different islands' features. Okay, I'm trying to forward this, okay. So the island of Kahoʻolawe is shaped like a fetus. And according to traditional histories, the island is the child of Maui and connected by an undersea ridge like an umbilical cord to the island. Chants of origin place the parents of Kahoʻolawe as Wakea, Kahiko, Luamea, and Papahanao Moku. And in the chants, many of the chants speak of the island being born a fledgling, he punua, a fledgling, he nai, a porpoise. All associated with various kanaloa forms or ocean forms. The island of Molokini is said to be the afterbirth after the island of Kahoʻolawe was born. And Pelehonuamea is also associated with the island. Some chants say that she brought the ocean to Kanaloa Kahoʻolawe. And at Lua, there is the Lua o Kamohoali'i at Kanapo Bay, which is associated with the navigator brother of Pele, Kamohoali'i, the kind of the ali'i of the sharks. The island has several names. Traditionally, we know it now as Kahoʻolawe, which means to be carried away with the currents. It can also mean to take and embrace. But in our research, in our oral histories with our kupuna, they informed us that the island was originally named Kanaloa, which means it's named after and dedicated to, as the chant I chanted says, was dedicated to Kanaloa, the god of the deep and shallow ocean. This is the view of Kahoʻolawe, Kanaloa Kahoʻolawe from Ulupalakua, where it looks to be sitting on the ocean like a whale, another body form of Kanaloa. And other chants speak of the name of the island as Kohe Malamalamo Kanaloa, the shining birth canal of Kanaloa. And others speak of it as Kohemalamalamo Kanaloa, the southern beacon of Kanaloa, or to the left and lift up like heaven. It is also said to be Kahiki Moi, where the sun sets and the spirit goes to rest. The island was home to fishers and farmers, and there are 69 koa, such as this koa in Hakio'awa, which are fishing shrines that mark fishing koa or fishing grounds in the ocean. So speaking to the abundance of the ocean and marine resources, you have these 69 fishing shrines right around, like a lay around the island. Kamehameha did bring Kahoʻolawe under his rule when he conquered Maui Nui and defeated the son of Kahikili, whose name is not Kamehameha, and then after the Ainoa, or the abolition of the kapu under Kamehameha II and Ka'ahumanu, and when Queen Ka'ahumanu, or Princess Chiefess Ka'ahumanu converted to Christianity, she adopted the 10 Commandments as law, and one of the punishments for violation of adultery, as well as for conversion to Catholicism, was banishment to Kahoʻolawe, where there was a prison under the kingdom at Kaulana. The island began to enter into commercial development with goat ranching, sheep ranching, and eventually cattle ranching. These are photos of Angus McPhee's cattle ranch operations at Kuhe'ia. And all of the ranching, the goats, the sheep, the cattle, led to severe erosion. It's said that from 10 to 12 feet of topsoil has just washed away and bled into the ocean, leaving only this impervious hard pan surface and very deep gullies. And then during the day after the Pearl Harbor was bombed, December 8th, then 1941 martial law was declared, and the island came under the control of the US Navy. Throughout World War II and through 1990, the island was used for live fire military exercises. This on the top left shows large targets that were made on the island, made of tires painted white, and these were shipped to shore targets for ships that would come and shell the island from the ocean. And then on the bottom right is the most extreme live fire test. Three live fire tests of 500 tons of TNT were blasted to simulate an atomic bomb blast and to see what the impact would be on communications on ships anchored nearby and the impact on the ships. So the island came into our current consciousness, the consciousness of my generation of Native Hawaiians and people throughout the islands, when Charles Maxwell, shown here, the president of the Aloha organization, which stood for Aboriginal Lands of Hawaiian Ancestry, put out the call to occupy federal land. And in this case, he decided to go with occupation of Kahoʻolawe in an attempt to bring focus nationally to a bill that Aloha organization had introduced into Congress for reparations to Native Hawaiians to be made by the US Congress in acknowledgement of the illegal role that the US government played and its agents in Hawaii played in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. And so to bring attention to this bill for reparations to Native Hawaiians, he felt we needed to have an occupation. In his words, we needed our own Wounded Knee, which had brought national attention to the Native American Indian rights and claims. And so the call went out to occupy Kahoʻolawe, and those who answered landed one boat. There was a blockade that the Coast Guard put up. Only one boat made it through with 9 people who became known as the Kahoʻolawe 9. And they made their first landing at Kuheʻia on January 6, 1976, 45 years ago. And this is stage 1 in the, this began or ignited the stage 1 in the reclamation of Kahoʻolawe and its elevation again as the sacred island it had once been by as honored by our ancestors as the Kohe Malamalamo Kanaloa, the shining birth canal of Kanaloa. So there were George Helm left early. There were 6 others that were picked up, and then 2, Walter Riddy and Emmett Aluli, stayed behind, and they wandered for 2 days before they were arrested. Stage 2 then became a period of organizing and outreach and direct action. And there were occupations, and there were arrests, and there were court cases, and there were educational rallies throughout every single island. The rallying call became Aloha Aina, as they're saying, Aloha Aina is a calling of our kupuna for creation, not desecration, proper use, not gross misuse, respect of the land, not abuse of land, self-sufficiency, not false dependency, living heritage, not a museum heritage, a pu'uhonua, not an off-limits area, caretakers, not owners of this Aina, Hawaii, take only what you need for today, not take and to reach the past to learn the many others' values, which sustained over 300,000 Hawaii people in harmony with nature. The whole movement suffered a setback with the disappearance and loss of George Helm and Kimo Mitchell at sea in March of 1977. March 7 and 9 is what the families placed on the plaques. In 1987, they were never found, and their disappearance is still a mystery. But in the period of in this period that followed, there was now a period of litigation against the Navy and court cases. One civil suit, Aluli versus Brown. Brown was the Secretary of Defense at the time. And this civil suit became important in eventually giving access to the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana to the island. But in the intervening period, the military started to allow the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana to visit the island and to bring, the ʻOhana decided to bring kupuna to walk the island and identify the sites that they were familiar with, and to share their mana'o and to share the mo'olelo, the history of these places of importance on the island, and to share oli and chants, and to explain the place names and reveal these place names and their meaning. And so the left, you have the landing of Auntie Emma DeFries, accompanied by Kawai Kapu Hewitt. On the bottom, you can see Uncle Harry Mitchell talking to a group of students there at the Aiʻaʻi fishing koa in Hakeoʻawa. This is the Aiʻaʻi fishing koa, one of the sites that our kupuna identified. And our mo'olelo speaks of how when Aiʻaʻi began the tradition of the ku'ula practices and fishing shrines out of Hamoa in Hana, he traveled then to Kipahulu and Kaupo, and then he came to Hakeoʻawa at Kahoʻolawe and established a fishing koa there. And our kupuna identified this koa as that fishing shrine. Kupuna also identified in these visits, a second visit to the island legally with the ʻOhana. This is a compass rock, and it's the compass rock is in. There's a line that goes this line here between the rocks. So there's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 rocks, and the line that runs this way from the ocean in is true, marks true west east, and the line that runs between these pohaku marks true north south. And again, our Homer Hayes knew of this feature and came to look for it and helped discover it with the ʻOhana. And as our chant from Uncle Harry spoke of this pohaku ahu aikupele ka pili o ke ave iki, which was part of a navigation school, in this case under ke ave iki, for the kahuna kilopai honua, those who studied the universe and the movement of universal life body, the stars and such. Sam Lono knew of a navigator's chair up at Pu'u Moa Ulaiki, and he sent his haumana to discover this chair. This is one view and a close-up view of that chair. And then we entered into stage 3 because the civil suit yielded a mandate from the court for a consent decree and joint governance of the island between the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana and the military. And so in this stage, the civil, it said that both in practice and as a matter of judicially protected law, the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana, without reference to either the state of Hawaii or the county of Maui, exercised shared governance responsibility with the US Navy over the island from 1980 until 2003, when the United States Navy had retained control of access to Kahoʻolawe, turned over that access, control of access to the state of Hawaii, which Stanton will speak about next. So for a period of 23 years from December 1st, 1980, when the consent decree went into effect, until November 11th, 2003, the consent decree providing access to the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana was in force. And in this period now of joint governance and joint use, we brought thousands of people from all over the islands, from Hawaii to Kauai, families, communities, students, and teachers, to come and visit the island, to experience the island, to live on the island as Hawaiians, to practice our Native Hawaiian cultural practices. And one of the important developments in this period of time, for the first important practices that was revived was the ceremony of the makahiki on Kahoʻolawe, which had not been openly and publicly practiced since the Ainoa in October of 1819. And under the guidance of the Edith Kanakaʻole Foundation, Auntie Edith Kanakaʻole and Nalani Kanakaʻole, the ʻOhana has begun to started in January of 1982 to close the 1981-82 season of makahiki. And it will be 35 years that we will have honored makahiki. And in this, we call upon Lono to bring this long cloud that you see here and to bring the soft, gentle rains that will help nourish the land so that the plants can revive and live. We also, as part of our cultural practices, built and dedicated a pahula. At that time, it was, I think, the fourth to have been built in modern times, dedicated by Hokulani Holt Padilla and Halau Pa'uo Hi'iaka. But it was during the makahiki season in November of 1987 that we dedicated it. And you can see Uncle Harry Mitchell there, Hokulani Holt in the gray, and also Pualani Kanakaʻole Kanahele also helped to dedicate it as well. We also opened ceremonies to Kanaloa, the god of the ocean, calling upon him to help us slip away the Navy and all of the abuse by the Navy of the island. And we reached stage 4 in October 22, 1990. We won victory and we did stop the abuse of the island. And so the years of Aloha Aina practice and prayer finally led, and our perseverance in our belief and our practice and our caring and love for the land, our dedication and commitment to stop the military abuse was finally paid off and finally rewarded with stopping the bombing. And I'm turning it over now to Stanton Enomoto, who will pick up the story of how the bombing came to be stopped. Aloha.
Mahalo, Davy. Let's see, I'm gonna try and share my screen and start my, start my remarks. Okay, oh, sorry, I call it my. Mahalo, everyone, aloha mai kako. I'm Stanton Enomoto. Before I kind of begin my portion of the program, I just kind of want to give a quick disclaimer in that I know Brianna in her introductions referenced my current employment with the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations within the Department of Interior. I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, my remarks this evening are, you know, go back to my time and my relationship with Kahoʻolawe. So in the early 1990s up into the early 2000s. So well before my current employment. So I just didn't want people to misconstrue anything that I'm saying as a reflection of the current position of the United States government or the Department of the Interior or my office. So with that, let me jump into this. I also want to aloha all the folks that are participating on the call. I had the chance to scroll through the participant list. I saw a lot of old friends, a lot of families. So thank you very much for taking your time to engage in this conversation tonight. So picking up where Davianna left off, kind of that time in 1990, it was really a very pivotal 7 months. A lot of it was, in some respects, catalyzed by the passing of Senator Spark Matsunaga on April 15th. But as Davey mentioned, there was this groundswell of movement prior to that. His passing created this space in which a month later, Governor Waiheʻe was able to appoint then Congressman Daniel Kaka into the Senate. And that triggered a response a few weeks later by Congresswoman Pat Saiki to announce her run for the Senate seat. So 1990, it was midterm elections in the Bush administration. So there was a lot of electoral dynamics going on. And again, in the 1990s, think about everything that was going on in the Hawaiian community, whether it was, 1988 at Honokahua with the burials or other things happening. There was a lot of energy around Native Hawaiian issues. So feeling that energy, Senator Akaka then introduces a bill into Congress, Senate 3088, calling for a study commission that would look at the cessation of military activities on Kahoʻolawe and the eventual return of the island to the state. Excuse me. So he introduced that bill. A few weeks later, the Department of Defense Appropriations Bill started moving through the House, HR 5803. And there was this idea of potentially connecting Senator Akaka's ideas in his Senate bill, which did not advance in the Senate, and trying to move it as an amendment into the House resolution. A couple weeks later, October 22nd, as Davey mentioned earlier, President Bush issues his memoranda to Secretary of Defense Cheney at the time to immediately discontinue use of Kahoʻolawe as a weapons range. So that was very clear, very directive. It was through the executive branch, it wasn't through Congress. But meanwhile, through Congress, that idea of introducing an amendment into the DoD Appropriations Act was moving through. And eventually it became law. President Bush signed it into law as Public Law 101-511. And there's specific sections, as I noted there, 8118 and 8119. It directed the Navy to provide funding to the establishment of this Kahoʻolawe Island Conveyance Commission, which I'll touch on in a second, as well as it continued this idea that was in the president's memo of discontinuation of military use of Kahoʻolawe. So it's not only the executive, but you have the Congress saying you can't do anything more military uses and bombing, et cetera, on Kahoʻolawe. And then, November 6th, the very next day, the midterm election, Senator Akaka wins that election for the Senate. So he retained the seat that he was appointed to by Governor Waihee after Senator Matsunaga passed away. So with that 1991 Department of Defense Appropriations Act legislation, it established the Kahoʻolawe Island Conveyance Commission. And they functioned for 3 years, more or less, to look at exactly that, the conveyance and the return of the island back to the state of Hawaii. What would that look like? So it was a 5-member commission. It was chaired by former Maui County Mayor Hannibal Tavares. Emmett Aluli was vice chair. They had a 5-member staff, a $1.5 million budget, which allowed them then to contract about 22 studies on a variety of issues, whether it was the legal setting, cultural natural resources, the history of the island that Davey, characterized earlier, key place names, and then digging into, what is the unexploded ordnance hazards that exist on the island? What does that look like? What is it going to take to clean it up? They had a series of public hearings throughout the state. Folks on the call may have even participated in those. It all culminated in a final report to Congress, which I have the cover of here, in March of 1993. Some of the key takeaways in that final report were, it was important that title, the deed title, the fee title to the island be conveyed back to the state of Hawaii from the United States. And I should note, just kind of a historical mention, 1953, President Eisenhower took title of the island under executive order and conveyed that title to the United States Navy. So under martial law, after World War II, the military had control of Kahoʻolawe, but it was in 1953 with President Eisenhower's executive order that actual fee title to the land and usage for military purposes was actually conveyed. So the recommendations from the Conveyance Commission was to restore the island back to the state. And there's provisions within the executive order that provided for that. Another key recommendation there in the Conveyance Commission report was the United States is responsible. Obviously, they took title to the island. They bombed the island for decades. Therefore, they should be held responsible for the cleanup and eventual environmental restoration of the island. And another key point, and I'll touch to this in other slides, is that there was a recognized need for special federal legislation to be established to do those things. Because at the time, existing environmental regulations, Department of Defense regulations, if Kahoʻolawe had to go through that process, today we'd still probably be debating various aspects of it. So it was deemed, we have a window of time, we can get special legislation through, we can get funding, and let's kind of do this. Recognizing that, it was also important that control of access to the island be retained with the Navy or the United States to do the cleanup. So while conveyance of title could happen, control of access and what happened on the island would be retained by the United States. And then lastly, it was also recognized that there was no existing department within state government to actually handle all of these responsibilities. So let's create a new state agency to do that. So those were the big outputs out of the Conveyance Commission. And then on the federal side, this is all 1990 to 1993. There was Governor Waihe'e and his staff were very key in seeing that opportunity and trying to move legislation through on the federal side as those recommendations were being developed by the Conveyance Commission. So things were running in parallel, not just on the federal side, but on the state side. And I'll touch on that in a second. But on the federal side, Senator Inouye was chairman of the subcommittee on defense appropriations. So he was in a very essential or critical position to advance legislation and funding with respect to the military for Hawaii. And so it was strategized that, his committee would be the vehicle under which this Title X appropriations language would be advanced. So in the House, September 1993, the DoD Appropriations Act language was introduced. A month later, Senator Inouye introduced an amendment as it advanced to the Senate side that included a number of provisions for the conveyance and cleanup of Kahoʻolawe, and I'll touch on that in a second. And it moved through the Senate, given his ability to influence his colleagues, and it was moved by voice vote. So it's kind of almost by unanimous consent. And it eventually was enacted a few weeks later by President Clinton. I mean, the appropriations bill is gigantic, and this was just one small provision within that Appropriations Act. But the architect of that special legislation for the conveyance, the cleanup, the cooperation between the state and the Navy for 10 years was the man you see there in the bottom right, just to the left of Emmett Aluli. His name is Neil Proto. He was a former Department of Justice, Deputy Attorney General, very skilled, very knowledgeable in the workings of legislation. He had a relationship with Governor Waihee and others, and came out to Kahoʻolawe and was not only touched by the physical space of the island, but all of those that were involved. And he saw or took on the kuleana to draft that legislation. So in the legislation, and this is the key thing that I think we all hung by when I was there, and Mike continues to hang by, is, it's this recognition of the island's cultural and religious significance. And through that, he drafted language that specified that the Navy needed to convey the island to the state within 180 days. It was key, because if conveyance didn't occur first, then it was likely the Navy would never convey the island for various reasons. So conveyance had to happen, but it was understood that in order to do the cleanup, which the Navy would be responsible for, they had to have control of access. So that provision was written in there. It was also very key that the Navy and the state had to coordinate during this period of the cleanup. And as I touched on earlier, with this whole notion of special legislation, Neil wrote in specific exemptions to CERCLA, or the EPA's Superfund law, so that the cleanup could occur within this 10-year period efficiently. And as an alternative, he created this process to develop an alternative regulatory framework, not only on the environmental side, but on historic preservation and a whole bunch of other things. The legislation itself, and this is through Senator Inouye and his staff, was able to provide $400 million for the cleanup over 10 years, and a carve out of about 11% for the state for ongoing management and future management of the reserve. And another key aspect of Title X was that it ensured that the United States would retain responsibility for environmental cleanup and unexploded ordnance after that 10-year period. So it's not as though it was all going to be dumped on the state of Hawaii. The United States would continue and does continue to retain that responsibility. And as Davey touched on earlier about the 1980 consent decree, this legislation recognized that and continue Congress, or it made Congress acknowledge the rights of the ʻOhana to continue to access the island under the consent decree. So this was a very key part of federal legislation. While the federal legislation was going on, the state legislation, again, was moving in parallel fashion. So 1993 legislative session, a bill started moving through to establish the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve, as well as the commission to administer the reserve. So it passed through session. It was signed into law by Governor Waihee in June. Couple key provisions I just wanted to call out in the statute. So section 6K2 defines the island reserve. So it's not just the island, but it's the 2 miles of water around it. The statute is also very, very clear about the kinds of uses that could occur on the island or within the reserve. And those include, as you see, traditional customary practices, preservation of historic and cultural sites, environmental restoration, native plants, et cetera, erosion control, what have you, and education. It's also made very clear that commercial uses are strictly prohibited. So the sacred nature of the island and the reserve, as Davey described, are preserved or not corrupted, if you will, by commercial uses. It also laid out the nature of the commission. So in one seat goes to the DLNR chair or the chair designee. Similarly, another seat goes to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs or the chair or their designee, a representative of Maui County, 3 representatives of the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana as approved by the governor, and 1 member of a Native Hawaiian organization, again, as approved by the governor. So it's a 7-member body. They're charged with a number of authorities and responsibilities, et cetera. One of which I just kind of wanted to point out, because I'll touch on it later, is that it gives the commission the authority to enter into stewardship agreements with Native Hawaiian organizations that have cultural expertise or certain skill sets that contribute to the restoration of the island. Another key provision, again, this is 1993, June 1993. In January, there was a huge commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the overthrow of the kingdom. A lot of energy, a lot of movement around Native Hawaiian sovereignty at the time. So there was a provision, and the first of its kind, and I think maybe the only of its kind in state statute, that it provides for the transfer of the island and the reserve to a sovereign Native Hawaiian entity upon recognition by the United States and the state of Hawaii. So this was huge at the time. Well, it still is huge. And it's still preserved in law. So yeah, the legislature and the advocacy and whatnot that created this was really, really important. It's kind of more of a footnote. As statutes created, there's administrative rules that implement statute. So in August 1994, emergency rules were adopted by the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission to effectuate certain responsibilities there. And then it was later replaced in 2002. So kind of moving on, part of Title 10, again, required the conveyance of the island to the state of Hawaii. So key, May 7th, 1994, signing ceremony of the deed, the actual conveyance of Kahoʻolawe from the federal government to the state of Hawaii occurred. The quitclaim deed was signed out at Palawea on Maui. It included a number of the clauses that were in the federal legislation. It acknowledged the Navy state cooperation in development of an MOU. The deed preserves the right of the United States to access the island to remove unexploded ordnance. And then the deed makes binding on any third party that may receive title to the island that they have to comply with those conditions. So let's see, moving on. Talking about the MOU, again, all of these things were moving in parallel over this period of 93, 94. it required that the Navy and the state enter into a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, to look to this 10-year period, 1993 to 2003, how are things going to occur? So there was the Navy, there was the state, and the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission, or KIRC, was acting on behalf of the state. So the MOU provided the terms and conditions for the cleanup, control of access, uses on the island. It specified a number of sub-agreements or documents that needed to be completed or negotiated in order for everything to follow through. Kind of the two key things you see in the picture there below you. On the left is the state was responsible for developing a use plan for the island, which identified habitation areas, restoration areas, etc. And then based on that state use plan, the Navy would then in turn develop a cleanup plan, which would more or less try to meet those needs. And there were, again, a number of sub-agreements to that. So the use plan was completed in '95. The Navy started its process of developing its cleanup plan after that. Meanwhile, the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission and the Navy were in negotiation to develop this unique regulatory framework that would serve the cleanup. I mean, given the waiver from Superfund laws, we had to create a new structure under which we could conduct the cleanup efficiently. With that, we also had dispute resolution provisions, as well as public participation provisions or an agreement. So all of that stuff was negotiated within 1 to 2 year time span. And I was part of those negotiations. And, you know, while those negotiations were ongoing, the Navy, because it had never conducted an unexploded cleanup or ordnance cleanup of this magnitude, initiated sort of a model or a test of how do we utilize our equipment? How do we engage work crews? How do we mobilize to an island that doesn't have an airport kind of thing? All of these things had to be considered. So the Navy initiated a model cleanup on about 230 acres on the island. And then the learning from that would inform their bigger solicitation, or what was called the omnibus cleanup solicitation, 1996, and eventually awarded 1997. Also going on at the state side in those years, the KIRC was developing its own environmental restoration plan for the island. It's managed its plans for managing the oceans, also incorporating all of the things that Davey said about the cultural significance of the island, the wahipana. How do we do that? And so the commission started developing a cultural use plan. One kind of culmination of all that was in 1997, we conducted a restoration ceremony at Pu'umohoi on Maui, and some of the photographs you see there, there was the ahu on the left on Maui, the ahu to the right of that is on Kahoʻolawe. Keone Fairbanks, our executive director at the time, served as the MC, and we were able to get, key dignitaries. And the contractor was there, the Navy was there, Senator Inouye was there, and it was really the brainchild of Auntie Frenchie. She drove this thing to happen, and it really set off the cleanup and of the island. So with the cleanup itself, a 2-tier standard, surface clearance, and then a tier 2 subsurface clearance that went down to about 4 feet or so below grade. Under the MOU, it was required that the Navy clear 100% of the island. Surface clearance, tier 2, 25% of the island with an additional 5% for roads, trails. The contract was eventually awarded to Parsons UXB joint venture for about 280 million. And at the time, this was the largest cleanup or unexploded ordnance cleanup in US history. To do the work, the Navy and the contractor decided to divide the island up into grids, 100 meter by 100 meter, 1 hectare grids, and there's about 11,000 of those. So every day, 400 plus workers flew by helicopter to the island to do the cleanup in one of these grids in various stages. So it required very specialized teams. Some did survey, archaeological research, biological research. Others were there to cut vegetation. Others were there to, remove ordnance. So it was highly specialized and required a high level of degree of coordination between the Navy, the contractor, and the KIRC. And, here we had on the bottom right, our own, office, our own hut on island. We also had offices on Maui and offices at Pearl Harbor to assist. So it was highly integrated during the cleanup. So this is just—
Hi, Stanton. I'm so sorry to interject. I just wanted to let our folks know that we are going to run a little over time for the program.
Okay.
So no rush at all, but I just wanted to make our audience aware of that. And
Okay.
Thank you so much. So much to be covered. I know. We should have allocated so much more time for this.
Yeah. And yeah, Kalamai, for those on the call, yeah, I'm trying to get through this as quickly because we certainly want to have time for Q&A, but I just wanted to, yeah, I'll continue on. Any case, so the island was divided up into various work areas, and what you might see as pixels are each of those grids. So there's about, 11,000 of them. There were a number of challenges during the course of the cleanup. How do we protect archaeological sites when you find ordnance that is unsafe to move and you need to blow it up in place? So what you see down on the bottom left is, the wall of tires. I mean, everyone was learning as they were going. I think that excavation pit that you see there, this is up near the summit of the island, Luamakika, and right across the road was a historic site. It was I think a fishing shrine, if I'm not mistaken. And in that hole was probably about a 250-pound bomb. So how do they detonate the bomb because it's unsafe to move and still protect the archaeological site? So things like tires were seen as a means of absorbing that explosive impact. And then the picture you see in the middle is another example. This is right near our base camp. So the distance between the blast on the right and the structures you see on the left, I want to say is about maybe 300 yards or so, so 1,000 feet. It's not that much. And the things you see flying up in the air are those protective works. They're tires. So we, working with the Navy, we tried to do what we could to minimize impact and protect cultural sites. Another thing was solid and hazardous waste management. This is in the middle of the island. During the Navy's cleanup years, they, for better or for worse, just dump stuff in gullies as a means of either erosion control and waste disposal. So how did we have to reconcile all of this stuff? There were questions at the time to save costs. Well, let's just cover it up and we'll just bury it. And we can continue to blow up bombs. And on our side, we're like, no, that's not right. You need to remove this stuff because it could contribute to further environmental contamination. And eventually that's what occurred. On the environmental restoration side, as I mentioned, there were these teams that were doing all of these various activities. One of them was to cut kiawe and cut brush in order to get to the clearance. You can't see bombs through grass and kiawe trees. So they cut brush and tied them up and flew them by helicopter and dropped them into the piles that you see there in the upper right. And that's a small pile, by the way. Some were much, much bigger. And eventually, yeah, they lit them on fire to get rid of the waste. But I think for us, more importantly, was kiawe is incredibly invasive. It drew down groundwater. And if there was an opportunity to kill the kiawe and preserve or try to enhance the water table, we wanted to do that. And regrettably, that for a variety of reasons did not happen. So these are just some of the challenges we encountered along the way. Another big challenge we encountered was around 1999, 2000. Navy informed the state that they're not going to be able to finish the cleanup as specified in the memorandum of understanding. So 100% surface clearance, 25, 30% subsurface clearance. We just didn't have the time. We're not going to have the money to get there. So the Navy reached out to us at the time and said, hey, you guys got to consider maybe reprioritizing what you're doing. So we went through a long deliberation process with the commission, and we came to this idea of really the goal of this cleanup is to be able to provide safe and meaningful use of the island. How do we do that? And we do that through a risk management process. And that risk management process is based on three things. One is having sufficient infrastructure, like you see there with the road. Another is clearing as much land as we can, obviously reduce the hazard. And thirdly, in the upper right, get as much data. We need to understand what the landscape of the island looks like. So that was our strategy. And we persevered through that, and we went through a sequencing process, identified areas of, okay, this is what we want for surface, subsurface, and had various steps for that. Eventually, what ended up happening by the end of the cleanup period, we got 100% assessment of the island. So we got the data across the island, and hundreds of new archaeological and cultural sites were identified in that process and were mapped and surveyed. Additionally, we were able to reduce unexploded ordnance risk in a number of areas. That's kind of the brown areas you see there, but the Navy was not able to certify that for use. We got a number of areas that were subsurface cleared and a number of areas that were surface cleared. So, and then there were a number of areas on the island, mostly on the west and south, that were not cleared. We just had assessment or risk reduction. So this is kind of the map of what it looked like at the end of the cleanup. So as we got closer to the end of the cleanup, it was really, how do we start closing things out? How do we prepare for that transition from Navy to state? The KIRC went through a process of developing its own management plans, risk management plans, which we completed in 2002. There was legislation to establish warning signs and other things on island by the state legislature. We ended up negotiating quite vigorously with the Navy, not only here in Hawaii, but also in Washington, DC, on that liability exposure. The Navy was obviously trying to reduce their exposure or limit their exposure. In our minds at the time, it was a little too much. And so we pushed back, and I think we eventually prevailed in the sense that the United States retained responsibility for newly discovered ordnance. And what you see there, that 5-inch projectile on the bottom, that was identified in 2014. I happened to be back on island and we were walking in a previously cleared area. I looked in a gully and there is this thing sticking up. So it's just a reminder that ordnance is going to continue to be exposed in these areas. Meanwhile, at the state legislature, there were concerns about whether or not the state had the capacity to manage the reserve, and we had to engage the legislature in a number of hearings, which we got ourselves through. And then we were also negotiating with the Navy around the demobilization of equipment and transfer of property, buildings, cars, what have you, weed whackers, everything. So the more the Navy kept on island, it saved their costs of demobilization. So there was incentives both ways, and we had to work that out. Also, along with the MOU and Title 10, the Navy had to certify their cleanup, and in that certification, identify areas that were safe to use for certain purposes. Those were legal documents that needed to be filed with the Bureau of Conveyances. So we did that. And then, you know, it all kind of culminated in November 2003. Ceremony at Iolani Palace marked the end of the cleanup. We went through a process of entering into a letter of understanding for access with the ʻOhana so they could continue to do what they needed to do. We did our contracts to keep the base camp open on island. And then on April 9th, 2004, as you see in the helicopter pictures below, the last helicopter with Navy personnel finally left. And that was, at least for me, an incredible day. So we continued to work on certification. The Navy's departure and our state control allowed us to expand our environmental restoration and environmental management programs, as well as fully implement our risk management plan. So keep people safe and how to come to the island appropriately. And with that, I apologize. I ran long on my remarks, but so much ground to cover. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike. So mahalo piha. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Stanton. Let me start sharing my screen here. Okay. Oh, I have to wait. Okay, here we go.
Yep.
Let me get this thing going. Okay. This one, share. And get that thing going. Okay, here we go. So, aloha kako. My name is Mike Nahoʻopiʻi. I'm the executive director for the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission. I've been the director since 2008. And basically, as Stanton is talking about, the Kahoʻolawe Island Reserve Commission was created as a state entity to receive and manage Kahoʻolawe on behalf of the state of Hawaii, until such time that a sovereign Native Hawaiian entity is recognized by both the state and the federal government, and at which time the island and its resources will be conveyed or transferred to that entity. Let me see. Where is my screen? Okay. So what is the KIRC? So what I'm going to be talking about mostly is what's happening today with Kahoʻolawe. The KIRC, the mission of the KIRC is to implement the vision for the island. And as was proved by the commission, the vision for the island is we see the island as the physical form of Kanaloa, the god of the ocean. We see the body form of Kanaloa restored to its pre-damaged state. But we also see this restoration as an effort of the people of Hawaii. So it's not a effort that we're going to hire a bunch of workers to go do it, but we want to involve the public and the general, the people of Hawaii to participate in this restoration effort, so that not only are they healing Kahoʻolawe, but they learn how to heal on their own. So, and also part of our undertaking is to provide the meaningful, safe use of the island. So we provide infrastructure, we provide safety programs, and other things to make sure that people who come to Kahoʻolawe have a safe and meaningful visit to the island. And we also focus on the restoration of the island on itself. This is kind of another view of what Stanton was showing you about the cleanup. You can see here on the island, the red areas are all the dangerous areas that were uncleared. So those are areas that we can't go into. The green areas are the areas that were cleared down to 4 feet. So those are the majority areas where we can dig, we can plant, we can build roads, we can build structures, we can do anything in those areas to dig the soil and do very intensive work in those areas. Everything else on the island is has only been surface cleared, so we can walk in those areas, but it's a lot of areas. And you see in this photo, a lot of those areas have this kind of reddish tint, which is the hardpan. And one of the things we had to figure out over the years is, how do you plant on areas where you can't dig? How do you create vegetation on areas where you can't dig a hole and put a plant in or bury seeds? So we've kind of developed new methods of planting in areas that you are not allowed to dig in. Today, the commission is composed, as Stanton was saying, 7 members. 3 of the seats are representatives of the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana. Our current chairperson is Joshua Kākua, who is with University of Hawaii. We also have the PKO Jonathan Ching, who will be departing this year. And incoming commissioner will be Anela Evans from Lanai. The other PKO seat is Bikiala Piskaya, who is from Molokai and works down in Kalaupapa. Our Office of Hawaiian Affairs representative is the chairperson of OHA, Hulu Lindsay. Our Maui County official is Saumalu Mataafa, who is with the Department of Planning, or the Department of Infrastructure, I believe. We also have a seat for the chairperson of the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Suzanne Case. And then our representative for Native Hawaiian Organization departing is Kumuhula Hokolani Holt, who will be departing in June, and incoming will be Dr. Benton Pang from the Department of, from the Fish and Wildlife Services, who specialized in Native Hawaiian dryland restoration as his dissertation thesis. We manage the island today with a staff of 14. At one time, it was a lot higher, but I'll show you some slides about the fiscal status of the KIRC. But we are divided into various programs. We have an administrative program, reserve operations, which is all the field operations that support our specialty programs. We have 3 specialty programs: our ocean management, our restoration program, and our cultural program. We lost 2 positions last year due to statewide vacancy elimination for all state governments. And we were actually survived this legislative session. We were up for 2 more cuts as part of the program review, statewide program review of 20% reduction for all state agencies. But we kind of came out okay. So we kept 14 people for the next 2 years. And this graph is something that Stanton wanted me to show you. In purple is the balance of the trust fund. So at one time, the trust fund at 2004 was about $33 million. 2004 was the last time a federal appropriation was placed into the trust fund. The KIRC operated for its entire duration on the balance of the trust fund. So from 2004 until 2016, there was no money coming in from any appropriations, and the trust fund quickly diminished all the way down to about 2016, which is the next slide. And you see here that for it wasn't until 2016 we finally got funding from the state under receiving general appropriation funds in the state budget. So for the last, since 2016, we have been funded by the state for our personnel and some of our operating costs, but we're still using portions of the trust fund for continuing our field operations. A lot of the work is very difficult, and Kahoʻolawe is a very remote and arduous place to work. So there is a lot of wear and tear on the equipment, on the people, and the supplies that we need to get out the island to make sure that the work we do out there is safe. What are we doing on the island? Well, our biggest focus is restoration and management of the resources of the island. Our restoration program, its function is to focus on native plants and wildlife restoration. The biggest areas there are native outplantings. So far, this is at the end of fiscal year 20, which is last year. We planted close to 500,000 plants into the ground. One of our other big project is erosion control. As we try to put these plants in the ground, we have to try to stabilize the soil loss. At one time, there was estimated almost 1 million cubic feet of soil was being lost a year due to erosion. There has been projections of up to 17 feet in areas of topsoil that has been run off, that has, due to wind and rain erosion, has been blown off the island. Our ocean management program focuses on protecting our resources of the reef system around the island and manages the fishing stock. The surveys that are conducted around the entire state has shown that Kahoʻolawe has the greatest biomass and diversity of any ecosystem reef system in the main Hawaiian Islands. The only place that has more biomass and greater diversity than Kahoʻolawe is the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So that's Kahoʻolawe also, as we theorize, act as a nursery for fish to spawn and then to also out-migrate to restock all the depleted areas that are around Maui, Kona, and maybe all the way to the other islands. Our cultural program focuses on preserving our historic properties on the island. We have over 2,000 individual archaeological features on the island. The entire island is listed on the National Historic Register. We have also cultural use of the island that the cultural program also facilitates. We facilitate community organizations as they want to come out to the island for cultural events, and also create partnerships and internships with Native Hawaiian organizations in order to create the next generation of restoration managers, restoration workers, cultural resource practitioners. We've worked with Alulike and Kupu as some of the areas to develop these new interns. Our reserve operation program focuses on the day-to-day of getting people and material and supplies to the island. The island is about 7 miles across the channel, but to get to the base camp, it's about 25 miles across. We have to get every single piece of equipment, every single food crop that we have out to the island via our boat. You see there, that's the Ohua. It's a 40-foot landing craft. We also have to make sure that people, as they work on the island and they come and volunteer on the island, they have a safe, secure place to stay, that they have meals provided, that they are protected from the heat, the sun, and the unexploded ordnance that still remains on the island. So we have a very intensive safety program that we work with all visitors to the island, and even train a lot of the ʻOhana members on how to safely recognize and avoid unexploded ordnance. Some of our infrastructure we tried to improve over the years. We've completed a complete photovoltaic grid for our base camp operations. We are currently only using solar power and batteries. We use some diesel fuel just to drive the trucks around and some gasoline for vehicles, but hopefully one of these days we'll be able to expand our PV field and get more electric vehicles on the island. We do have one electric Polaris on the island that we use. We run an inter-island boating operation. We're probably the only state agency that does a regular run between the islands for cargo and for people. And the safety program that has been developed for Kahoʻolawe has been recognized by the Navy as one of the better safety programs in the nation for unexploded ordnance. And lastly, our administration functions, as a state agency, we still have to function as a normal government agency. So we have HR issues, fiscal, technology, infrastructure. We have data connections that we have to maintain with the island. We have a very robust volunteer and outreach program that we utilize to bring volunteers to the island. We do outreach community work with different schools for education, for marine education, historical outreach. And we also have a research library that we maintain. Most of the documents that Stanton was talking about are available on our website. We have a living library where you can look at different photos and through the history of Kahoʻolawe. And we have a app that is downloadable for free on the either on the Google Play Store or iTunes. It's It's the Kahoʻolawe Island Guide, which provides you maps with links to different key features or sites on Kahoʻolawe. Some of our current projects that we're working on this year, we have we're getting funding from the Department of Health for maintaining and expanding some of the native plantings we have in Hakuawa Valley on the upper slopes of the island. We have funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences on a virtual library system that we have. We're also creating in-house archives to store a lot of the artifacts that were collected off the island, and that we've been collecting from different agencies across the state. We have received artifacts from the Bailey House Museum, from Fish Museum, and some other places, and we're housing them at our facilities on Maui. We're working with the NOAA to do a marine education grant program that we are partnering with Maui High on a ocean education grant. We have funding to do some marine debris cleanups at Kanapo, and Cook Foundation of Maui is funding us to get more native plants into the ground on Kahoʻolawe. Some of the major infrastructure projects that we've done over the years, starting from the upper right, you can see our photovoltaic field that is about 100 kilowatts that provides all the power for base camp. Below that is the conceptual design for our Kahoʻolawe Education Operations Center to be located at Kihei. We have a base of operations on Kihei where we keep our boat, and we're going to be building a nursery, and also this will be our office and a museum and education center where we can house the collections of all the Kahoʻolawe artifacts and exhibits that have been done over the years on Maui for people to visit and to learn more about Kahoʻolawe. We've had a dryland project, dryland forest restoration project that was funded by the state. You can see in the lower picture. And then the last project that we completed a few years back was a polycarbonate shelter building down in Hakuawa to replace this old plastic tarp that was being used by the ʻOhana for their base camp down there. So now they have a new polycarbonate building down there. And lastly, something that all three of us have worked together, Davianna, myself, and Stanton, is on the last strategic plan that we developed called Iola Kanaloa. Iola Kanaloa looks at the year 2026, which is not that far away. In 50 years since the first landing on Kahoʻolawe in 1976, what do we envision Kahoʻolawe to be after 50 years of Hawaiian occupation? So as part of the strategic plan, we've developed 8 program areas as the 8 arms of the He'e, which is Kanaloa. And as each of these functional programs, we are looking at different projects that meet those goals of Iola Kanaloa. Restoring and conserving the natural environment, looking at programs to establish more learning and observations about the island, preserving the history of Kahoʻolawe through digital or archives, creating sustainable shelters on the island, facilities, so our PV system, our dryland CIP water resource programs, our uwala patches for growing food on the island. How do we maintain cultural sites, customs, and traditions? How do we expand awareness and access and experiences for people on the island? How do we provide sanctuaries for dialogue, well-being, and for healing? And then lastly, establishing Kanaloa's role through the transition being the transition of to a Native Hawaiian sovereign entity. So these are the things that the KIRC are doing today. We still have a lot more to move forward, and I'll keep mine nice and short, and I'll disconnect from the slideshow, and we can go to Q&A. Give me a few seconds while my thing, there we go.
Mahalo, Mike. I encourage our presenters to come on so we can all be here. Wow. So much great information was just shared. And I feel like this is such an honor and privilege to have the three of your minds in one space. So I just want to really get to the chase. We have some fabulous questions that have come in. I want to start with Mike real quick, just segueing off of your presentation. You talk a lot about a lot of the wonderful programs that KIRC has going. And of course, Davianna and Stanton, please feel free to add your insight into this as well. But first, Mike, what are the biggest challenges still present in caring for Kahoʻolawe, and what is being done or should be done to mitigate these problems?
Well, one of our biggest challenges is still the unexploded ordinance. You know, unexploded ordinance has really tailored the way we manage the island and manage the way we do restoration. In a normal restoration effort, you just go out there, you start planting things in the ground, and you just keep moving, you know, like what they're doing on Hawaii Island, planting koa trees, just keep poking holes in the ground, putting things in there. We have to be aware of where we're planting, and even in the areas where we can't dig holes in the ground, we've created new techniques to build soil from the wind. So we've created these rock mounds where we have a lot of rocks on Kahoʻolawe. So we lay rocks out on the hard pan, and after a month, the wind has blown enough dirt to bury the rocks. And then now it creates this mound of clean soil that we know there's no bombs. So we can plant in those areas. Water is always going to be difficult. We are in the lee of Hawaii Island. We have been going through droughts for the last 10 years probably. We probably get about 18 inches of rain on the top of the island, and we're down to 8 inches on the coastline. So our restoration effort is going to be like that. Remote area, we're very, just getting to Kahoʻolawe, minimal infrastructure. So, and last one is going to be funding. We were lucky in the early days to have the trust fund, but I think that was over 20 something years, depending on the trust fund. Now we are slowly recovering from the two state recessions. The biggest one when I first got there in 2008, which was the post real estate market. And now this is the post COVID-19 recession. So it's going to be funding. Davey or Stanton, you guys got anything else?
Well, for us as the Protect ʻOhana, it's continuing to expand the recognition of Kahoʻolawe as a very sacred place and as a center for cultural learning and practices of Hawaiian cultural practices. And so that recognition and that respect and reverence for the island is really important. And so that's why it's important that we maintain that there be no commercial use of the island. That's been a challenge. And how do we generate revenue for the island through maybe learning and cultural activities, but that's not commercial use of the island. So that's been a challenge for us to have education be one of the centerpieces of the activities on the island, and continuing to expand that respect for the island as a sacred place of kanaloa.
Yeah, Davey and Mike, you guys hit all the main points. I guess the only other thing that I would add, it goes back to Mike's last slide about this, the plan we all worked on, Iola Kanaloa, and it really embraces the idea of Kahoʻolawe for our lahui as being that place where we can come into a neutral space and have the kinds of conversations that we need to have, and it be a safe space. So it's an opportunity. And, in the 8 priorities that Mike mentioned, it's one of the last couple of them, but I think it's worth acknowledging that where we are in this time as Native Hawaiians, that Kahoʻolawe can be that space where we can talk openly with one another, and we can kind of let go of whatever agenda we have. And the island helps us with that. And that's the power of Kahoʻolawe, I think. we have nowhere else to run, you know, and we can have these conversations that need to be had. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Does KIRC still take the position that it violates no commercial use to allow people who want to assist with restoration to pay their own way to the island and for the cost of meals, staffing, etc., for a multi-day stay, for example? They've gone on to ask if there's extensive replanting to be done, wouldn't it be worth testing such a plan? Someone else asked if there's the potential opportunity for federal funding to pay for more individuals to do restoration work on the island.
Yes. Well, right now we've already had the determination that as a state agency, we're allowed to assess a fee. It's a administrative fee that is not by definition a commercial activity. So we do take volunteers on the island and we assess a access fee as a government agency as their kind of contribution to their stay on the island, which, you know, it's it has to be administrative in nature. And, you know, there's a lot of technical issues about having a fee. So it's not a complete reimbursement or paying their own way, but more of a right of entry kind of type activity, which is not deemed as commercial. We also do seek a lot of federal funding for years. Well, you know, one of the challenges we have is that most of the federal funding are distributed by states, you know, to the states. And what is unique about Kahoʻolawe is that we are one of the only state agencies that manages land, water, cultural, archaeological. We have like kind of the entire Department of Land Natural Resource all rolled up into one small agency. And with that, because we are focused on one piece of land, a lot of the federal funding that comes to the state of Hawaii goes to the bigger state agencies that, so we're always in competition almost with our other divisions within DLNR, trying to get a piece of those funding. An example is like for monk seal, most of the monk seal funding for Hawaii goes to the Department of Aquatic Resources, but we have a large population of monk seals that we also manage on our own. So it's trying to get determination from the federal government that we are still a state entity. Like a lot of people don't recognize that we're a state entity, but we're separate from the other state entities.
So what are the lessons learned from Kahoʻolawe that should be considered when taking care of other lands in Hawaii, like Waiahole, Waikane, Makua, Pohakuloa, etc.?
Well, you know, we were fortunate and there was a convergence of conditions that allowed for Kahoʻolawe to be turned over before the cleanup started. And it was because we had a Democratic governor, John Waihee, who was also Native Hawaiian and had been a part of the movement to stop the bombing of the island. We had Senator Daniel Inouye and Akaka and Neil Abercrombie in Congress and Patsy Mink, who were all supportive of the island. And we had a Democratic president and a Democratic majority in the Senate and the House. And William Clinton was very close friends with John Waihee. So we were able, a very senior Senator Daniel Inouye, who was the head of the Military Appropriations Committee. So all of that came to bear in allowing the island to be turned over, as you were saying earlier, May 14th, 1994, before the cleanup started. If the cleanup had been done and the island had not been turned over, we would never get it back. There is a statistic about even after the cleanup was done, well, so now we only have 9% of the island that is cleared to 4 feet, a depth of 4 feet. And, you know, 68% is surface, but there's still 23% that's not been cleared at all. And the 68 that's only surface cleared is still dangerous. The island is still dangerous. So I saw some questions about, you know, having people come on their own. You can't go to the island on your own. You have to be escorted because the island is still dangerous unless you know where the paths are, and people are trained to provide that escort to identify where the danger areas are and to avoid those dangerous areas. So that all has to be, that's part of the consideration of how we can bring people to the island and expand its access to the island. But the more that we can, as the Protect Kahoʻolawe ʻOhana and KIRC get the resources, then the more we can include volunteers and bring more and more volunteers to experience the island and contribute to its healing.
Mm-hmm.
I have two more questions that I'd like to wrap up with. We have an attendee from Guam, and they've asked, I was wondering what sovereign lands means in the context of Kahoʻolawe. Would this be similar to a Native American reservation, or would it be Hawaiian independence from the US? What would the path and potential barriers to getting a sovereign entity established be?
Sounds like a Stanton answer.
Yeah, I was thinking the same.
Oh, we gotta draw short straws on that one. Yeah, again, my disclaimer earlier, I'm not speaking on behalf of, given my current employment with the United States and the Department of Interior. These are, I'll try to frame it with respect to my experiences on Kahoʻolawe, and I'm not sure I know how to do that. And Davey, I may end up dumping to you on a lot of this stuff, but there's, I think Hawaii's history is well known over the last 100 years. What happened in 1893, or the various events leading up to 1893, subsequent events with respect to 1900 and the Organic Act, and the whole nature of ceded lands. I mean, that history is known, it's documented. Within our community, there may be some debate as to the meaning of those things, and that debate, certainly needs to continue, I think. And we have, a few years ago, the pathway to reestablish that relationship, formal relationship between the United States and the Native Hawaiian community has been, developed. And that was not without controversy and without, debate, etc. So a pathway exists now. As it relates to the territories, it's a tricky issue. I mean, I think, the Davis case in Guam is, exemplifies that. So there's, it's a little bit tougher. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think the territories are in a little bit more of a unique situation than we are here in Hawaii. I mean, we all have our challenges, and the path is long and it's windy and it's crazy, but it's at least, in Hawaii we have a path. I think it might benefit the territories if there's that interest to, navigate that space. I don't know. Davey, you're much more the scholar than I am on this, so I'll throw to you.
In our ʻOhana, we follow what Uncle Harry Mitchell advised us when he was still with us, and that is to follow all paths towards sovereignty and independence. So we support the effort to that where there was a constitutional convention, an AHA, and both myself and Emma Luli and Katie Kamehameha, we were all members of the ʻOhana participating in that process, and Uncle Robert Bobby Lu'uai. We support efforts toward independence of Hawaii. We want to take whatever path would be open first to whoever reaches the mountain top first, we want to be there so the island can come back.
Thank you, Davianna. So I want to ask the final question, and thank you so much for the participants who have stayed with us for this little extra time. What, in each of your opinions, is the most ideal or pono future for Kahoʻolawe, and how can this be achieved? And someone else has asked if the state of Hawaii can be trusted in helping to establish these futures moving forward.
Well, I answered the question, but I'll just repeat what it's, our vision. We worked with the Edith Kanakaʻole Foundation to give us a cultural vision for the island, a cultural plan for the island, which is a process to have everyone who comes with us be trained in cultural practices as Native Hawaiians. But they also saw the island, and we're working within the Eola Kanaloa plan that we all worked together. The vision is to establish the island as a center for mastery in Hawaiian cultural practices, because we can practice there without distraction, or else being photographed and being, like gawked at. It's a place where we can practice and master our cultural and spiritual practices. So that is our vision for the island, and to elevate the island again to be recognized as a sacred center for learning. And there are many other places in the islands too, but Kahoʻolawe is so unique because it is an island that is disconnected from the other islands. And I wanted to just add, I had lost my train a little on that other question. The way that we have to protect the other lands, Pohakaloa Makua, is to prevent any expansion. And the leases on the use of Pohakaloa and Makua are expiring, and we should advocate that those leases not be renewed, I feel very strongly, because it's the more that they use and the more intense use of the land for military purposes and the more extensive use, then it will lead to never being able to clean up the land and get it back. And we need these lands to be protected.
Mahalo, Davy. Stanton or Mike, do you have any closing mana'o you want to share?
Yeah, I don't expand on what David was saying about the unexploded ordnance use in the states. Having come from the cleanup side of this whole endeavor, we were kind of lucky because on Kahoʻolawe, we are dealing with mostly World War II and Vietnam era munitions, which are, even though they're dangerous, they're fairly simple compared to the type of munitions that you see today. I came from a military background. I'm a former Navy officer. Some of the briefings I've had about mine warfare and the type of weapon warfare that is in today's type of realm are a lot more complex and complicated to deal with than older World War II type munitions. So they're a lot more dangerous nowadays, and we're dealing with things like depleted uranium, which, we were lucky that we didn't have it on Kahoʻolawe because we're an older military range, and those type of weapons didn't exist at that time. But we were, kind of lucky. The biggest thing we deal with is lead, lead bullets and steel from the bombs. Other than that, our mission with the KIRC is to put it in a better place. Put the island in a better place than what we received it. We see our mission, our goals is to prepare Kahoʻolawe for whatever future that is going to be its outcome. We want to try to give it an infrastructure, try to give it places where people can live on the island, people can grow food, people can have water sources. Those are the key elements of sustainable living. If we can build some of that infrastructure or recreate some of those environmental areas on the island, we're hoping when the KIRC leaves and turns it over to a sovereign entity, that it will be in a better condition than what we received it from the Navy.
Maikai.
Right on. I just want to maybe add a little more spice on what Mike and Davey said. And, you know, I agree with both of your folks' comments. And as I was listening to what you were saying, it reminded me of the last slide in my presentation. And it was a shot on April 10th, 2004, the day after the Navy left. There were a small group of us that we tried to get up early enough to make it up to the summit, but we didn't quite get there. So we were at Kealiʻolalo and watched the sunrise. And, you know, it was this realization for those of us that were there that here we are. The island finally came back, you know, from the Navy. We no longer had to ask permission. Can I get an escort or a driver to take me to this place? Can I, you know, whatever. We drove the trucks up there on our own. And it was this liberation. And, you know, we flew the Hawaiian flag in base camp, just the Hawaiian flag, as that kind of acknowledgement or this sense of solidarity of, wow, the island finally came back and it's in Hawaiian hands. And so there was excitement, celebration, all the, you know, a range of emotions. But I think with that also came this weight of kuleana. It's like, now, okay, we gotta do it. We cannot blame the Navy anymore because, you know, we cannot go here, cannot go there. We cannot blame anybody else. It's all up to us. So we took it on. I mean, you have to. And Mike, Davey, I mean, you guys know this is what self-governance is. And it's not always easy. It's not always pretty. It's a lot of work. And I think that's, for me at least, the lesson of Kahoʻolawe after the Navy left was we got to start exercising our muscles around self-governance. And what does that mean for the resources that are there on the island, land, water resources, the vegetation, the archaeological sites, how we conduct ourselves on the island, who, you know, access control, safety, everything. That's what self-governance means. And so I think for me, the big lessons coming out of this is, as a lahui, as a community, you know, we've been at this issue for decades. And if we want to advance as, you know, as a lahui, Kahoʻolawe has so many lessons. You put people out there and you're forced to interact. You're forced to get back to basics, what matters, what's important, and how are we going to do things. That's the beauty of ʻOhana access, of KIRC access, etc. That's the beauty of the island. So it's how do we make those kinds of experiences more, whatever, how can we make them happen more often? Because anyway, to me, it gets back to that element of the Iola Kanaloa plan of, yeah, Kahoʻolawe is the piko, and that's where this stuff can happen, right? And we just got to be willing to do that as a lahui. So, you know, whatever it takes to get there, you know, let's go do it. Once you're on the island talks to you. You don't have to talk to anybody else. You just listen, and that's what it is. So anyway, sorry, my 2 cents.
Mahalo.
Thank you, Stanton. Yeah, powerful words to close on. And thank you, Mike, Davianna, Stanton, for the work that you've done and continue to do to protect Kahoʻolawe, to support your community, preserve Hawaiian tradition. I mean, clearly this conversation could go on for so many more hours. And for everyone who's attended our nearly 2-hour discussion, thank you. This is going to be shared, I know, far and wide. So I'm like, gosh, we captured like almost every little segment of this issue, and I'm so grateful for your time tonight and for your wisdom again. Just really quickly, I did want to plug an upcoming program from Historic Hawaii Foundation, May 24th. From 5 to 6:30 p.m. They're presenting the virtual film screening of Hawaiian Soul, a narrative short film based on the true story of George Darrett Helm Jr., a leader and artist that used his voice to inspire a revolution of consciousness, who was mentioned earlier. And the film is going to be followed by a panel discussion with the filmmaker and producers, as well as HHF board members, Hawaii State Film Commissioner. The link will be shared in the post-event email that all of our attendees will get in the next day or two. And we also have a program survey that we would really appreciate your feedback if you have the chance to fill out. And with that, wow, I'm processing all of this. So much amazing ground covered tonight. Again, I'm so thankful for each of our presenters, and I just wish that you all take care. And thank you with your continued work, your dedication. Mahalo and aloha.
Mahalo.